Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for being here for this month's Public Safety Review. I am Miriam McNabb, editor at dronelife.com, and with us today are my co-host, Tim Martin, a veteran police officer and director of UAV training at the Regional Training Center. We have Chief Charles Warner, director of drone responders, and Drone Responders board member, former director of UAV operations at the U.S. Department of Interior, and renowned aviator, Mark Bathrick. Thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Miriam. Great to be here.
As always, we will remind our audience, our guests do not pay to be here, and we don't pay them. We invite the people we think have a really valuable perspective for our audience. However, if you would like to sponsor an episode, please reach out to Drone Life or Drone Responders. Right about now is when we'd be thanking you for your support and mentioning your product or services. So please let us know if you'd like to sponsor an episode. Um, Before we get started talking about current events, we have to talk about the big event of last month. Charles, super successful. Again, public safety, National Public Safety Drone Conference.
Yeah, so I'll first apologize, everybody, in case you hear noise in the background. I have a 3-year-old grandson, so I'm watching him at the same time.
He's training up
Yes,
the next generation.
that's right. March 12th and 13th was a phenomenal conference at Busch Gardens. We had 250 people last year in attendance. This year we had over 600, and we still had people on a waiting list. And we went from 15 vendors to 62 vendors, and there's my background. And we had to actually hold off on 10 because we weren't sure we had room. So we became the largest public safety US conference in the world. And I'm also pleased to say that Drone Responders is right at the 9,300 mark of members. So same place next year, about the same time of year. Once you see the registration come, don't wait because we see that it fills up quickly. And it was just great. Networking, sponsors, exhibitors, the attendees, presentations, everything was wonderful. So thanks for everybody who attended. And for those who didn't, you missed a great party as well. And hope to see you next year.
Absolutely. It was really well worth attending. A lot of access to people in the community as well as vendors hands-on with different products and a lot of opportunity to sort of network and discuss. So great show. All right. Let's dive right in here and get started by discussing some of the current news stories and issues. So I had one that I wanted to jump in, but before we do that, actually, because it's kind of still such a big headline. Tim, you mentioned in pre-show that you had recently spent time with the Baltimore department, who then was sort of tested during the bridge collapse, recent bridge collapse.
Yeah, so I had the pleasure of going out to Baltimore and training different units in their department in drone operations. One of which being their their newly started CSI unit, and Megan's her name. She's their CSI officer out there, and she was one of the first responders at the bridge collapse to use the drone. So it's going to be interesting to kind of catch up with her and find out, how that went. I mean, that was an active rescue for a large part of it until NTSB eventually stepped in and started flying their drones and publishing their drone videos. Yeah, that was a perfect use case for not only law enforcement and crime scene, but also for rescue efforts.
Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of gets right to the point of why we do what we do, right? Because when a disaster strikes, you need to know what's going on as fast as
Yeah.
possible. So, yeah. All right. The first topic that I wanted to bring up was a paper published by the ACLU 2 weeks ago. This follows a paper by the same author talking about drone as first responder programs. And this one is actually titled, There Are Curbs Needed on Police Drone Surveillance of Public Gatherings. And in the piece, the author says that they are publishing this sort of in response to anticipated BVLOS flight regulation. Um, let's hear from you guys what you thought about it. I know what I thought I thought about it. I thought it was a little problematic in its accuracy and certainly in its interpretations. But let's hear from you. Mark, what were your first impressions?
Deja vu. So I say that because I came from the military to DOI in 2006. This grand idea to start a drone program because DOI had such vast responsibilities, and drones were a perfect match for it, particularly with their budgets, staffing. What I knew from my military experience is drones were weapons of war and weapons of intelligence, right? And so I realized that the tech was not the hard part. It was gaining agency and public acceptance. And so that's why I say deja vu. This is really just a reflection of maybe, the community, another reminder to the community, if you will, that, we really need to get out there proactively and discuss what we're doing, why we're doing it, and I'm really glad that the police departments are providing that kind of oversight, overwatch, whether that's on a drone or on a crewed aircraft or on fixed cameras, right, to protect my safety and that of my family, and to make sure that things go well. And so I think that's what we learned. Just to end my comment, we did like 30,000 flights before I retired, and all of our public land, right? We are out there in a national park, a refuge, and I think one of the greatest measures of our success was we had 0 public complaints. And I attribute that to the fact that we did a privacy impact assessment, and we constantly went out to the public and told them what we were doing. That's why I coined the term drones for good back in 2006 to help them understand this is the application, and this is the application we're talking about here.
Yeah, and Mark, in pre-show we were discussing, so back in 2016 I actually was covering a talk that Mark presented, and on the 4 sort of necessary tenets for running a successful drone program, and surprising no one, security and privacy were 2 of the 4 right there. So not a new idea. I should also contextualize this at the focus of the paper was about police overwatch operations. So keeping large public gatherings, we would say keeping them secure. Tim, what are your thoughts?
Well, obviously, he has every right to write this paper, and his position is not surprising. But he, like you mentioned before, he's definitely got some things completely wrong in this as far as perspective goes, and maybe it's just that he hasn't been given the perspective of law enforcement in this. Drones absolutely were used in protests throughout the country. I know personally at my department we used them. On a lot of protests. And one of the things that is the alternative to using drones is going back to the skirmish line. Officers with hats and bats and shields confronting crowds, officers responding to hotspots that maybe don't need to be responded to. Having the drones do overwatch, he calls it surveillance. It's overwatch over crowds of people. And can make the difference of the law enforcement personnel on the ground getting involved in confrontations versus just sit back and watch. And a lot of times you get people that get on their soapbox. They want to debate with other people. A large crowd will form, and by the end of it, they hug each other and walk away. You introduce a group of police officers into that crowd before that hug happens, and guess where the attention's going to go. One of the things that he got wrong is he quotes in there about how California specifically, he picked on my state specifically. As far as I know, California is the only state that a law was enacted, a penal code was enacted requiring posts to come up with guidelines on crowd management. Those guidelines specifically address the use of drones, and they encourage the use of drones to get that situational awareness and the overwatch. So he's quoting that California wants to eliminate the use of drones, probably without even knowing that this penal code exists that says that drones specifically, in protests are something that should be used. And it not only does it say it goes from peaceful to riotous protests, so it's the whole spectrum. And one of the things he misses in here is that yes, you do your due diligence. You do intel gathering before the protest occurs. If it's a 20-person protest, like he says in the article, and there is no indication on social media or anywhere else that it's going to be violent, or that a counter protest is going to exist that's going to be violent, we didn't use the drones. We probably did not use drones on more protests than we did. So there is that mechanism in place to, what he's saying is without doing research to methodology in law enforcement, he's trying to kill something that's already being done. And I think it just takes a little bit of education on our part in public safety to the ACLU, because they have a job to do. They're protecting the people, but we also have a job to do, and we need to protect our people, and the innocent people out there that could fall victim of crimes during protests. So there's a lot to unpack. We could do the whole show just on this article, so I'll stop it there. But
Agreed.
yeah, there's a
As
lot
I
in there.
as I mentioned, I am based in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm a loyal Bostonian, and I remember vividly the marathon attack, which may have been forgotten in other places, but has certainly not been forgotten here. And it was shortly after that incident that at the time there was a tethered drone company based here in Massachusetts. That's no longer the case, founded by Helen Grainer. And they implemented the tethered drone technology for Overwatch of the marathon. And I mean, frankly, I was absolutely delighted to see that. I think the other issue is that he focuses on the use of drones in political protests without sort of thinking that in a police context, Overwatch missions are about groups of people, not necessarily. So it includes sporting events and all kinds of instances when you have a group of people, not not just politically motivated groups. And the other issue that I sort of had trouble with was the implication that the mere presence of drones, regardless of what they are doing, is impinging upon people's freedom to act as they would if the drones weren't there. And that's where I think, gosh, at a certain point, you think, okay, somebody getting their burrito a few minutes sooner, not really, not the kind of life-saving applications that I get most excited about. However, it does mean that people will be sort of more familiar with them, may not find them as threatening and I don't know, upsetting.
I just want to add 2 points. One, we've seen so far with the drones, especially DFR, have been more of a de-escalator than any other thing that we've seen out of that. And it has actually saved lives, literally saved lives. So it's important that we don't lose that sight of what it's able to do. And we always preach, and most public safety agencies and law enforcement are following the rules that the ACLU put out already about protecting privacy.
Yeah.
They
I also
also,
think oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say to Marion's point, he talks about, well, the very low percentage of this ever happening in terms of, the history. And I was reminded that many bad things have happened that never happened before, right? Boston Marathon, 9/11, right? So, in my view, the fact that you have aircraft overhead, cameras on fixed places, or drones, can actually serve as a deterrent to bad behavior. And we never know when something bad is going to happen. So we like to have that overwatch, if not to deter, to help us, mitigate, the damage and catch those folks that are doing that.
Right. And he says they say they're just monitoring the traffic, but I would argue, like in a place like Boston, they're actually monitoring the traffic. That's actually, and it could be very significant because were there to be an emergency and you have a large group of people trying to exit a cluttered urban environment, you really need to know those things. So Anyway, all right, we will move on. My next story was much more lighthearted. It was a great way to get community support. I don't know that we need to do deep insight on this. I just thought it was a great story about a local Oklahoma police and fire departments got their drones out and held a public drone race. um, really just to kind of get community exposure, have people have an opportunity to come and see the drones, see the aircraft, have a chance to interact with the officers, both fire and police. Um, Super fun way to get community support. So if anybody out there is looking for outreach ideas, there you have one.
I really think that this happens a lot out there. I
Yeah.
think a lot of police departments are reaching out and doing this. The big difference between this department probably reached out to the news and invited them, and that's how they got the coverage. And
Yes,
that's really a great thing to do. Is if you there's a lot of unsung heroes out there that are doing this with their drone programs, this exact thing, and they don't publicize it. They do it for the right reasons. So invite those news cameras out there, and you'll get a nice article in the paper for sure.
absolutely. Absolutely.
I was going to say, I think this is perfect story to go after the one we just talked about, because this is the kind of outreach that really makes a difference in the public's eye. They see what's going on. They have a chance to examine drones. We probably brought some video with them of what they do and how they operate them. And the other part of this that's really exciting is kind of the STEM opportunities, right? Because you have young people who are our future learning about this great new technology, and maybe that's inspiring them to go into law enforcement or go into firefighting, or in our case, go into government and be part of the Department of the Interior, or U.S. Forest Service, whatever. And so I think those are fantastic opportunities. I love reading those stories.
And as I pointed out in our email while I introduced the next, an even better way to get into community support is a picture about a story rather about a local police finding a missing child in minutes in the winter in cold environment using thermal imaging attached to a drone, and uh, that I find is a great conversation shifter when somebody's I'm out in my normal life unrelated to drones, and somebody talks about drone swarms, like they've seen on some sci-fi movie. And if you just say to someone, well, if my kid was missing, do I want 100 drones looking for him or one? I can tell you right now. So, well, my kid's 22 now. I don't know. But yeah, I think that continuing to sort of publicize these, search and rescue and recovery stories. DJI has really, you got to hand it to them. They have done a wonderful job of tracking those stories and the sort of lives saved and people found. So,
Absolutely.
all right.
That's a good story.
And now, unfortunately, we're going back to something less positive. This is something I wrote about last week. I didn't see very many other people picking it up. So it is something called the Detect Act, which has just been presented by bipartisan couple of senators, and where lawmakers are calling for NIST to develop clear cybersecurity guidelines for drones. Sounds good on the surface. What do you guys think?
So I'm speaking as a former federal executive for 16 years. And one of the things I was always a little bit frustrated about is this new legislation that is really piggybacking on something that's been around for a while. Let me explain. So NIST in 2014 developed a cybersecurity framework. It's a great document. And they're now up to version 2.0 that came out, I think, in February. And it's a great framework for all IT, right? And not, drones included. DHS CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency within DHS, they've developed multiple very useful documents and guides on cybersecurity in general and drone cybersecurity and cyber hygiene. And yet this, what I read is that the folks that are doing this coming up with this idea may not be aware of all that's been done. And what concerns me about that is it breeds that uncertainty within the community, within industry. Is there something new coming? Should I wait to develop a new product, or should I wait to start or expand my drone program? And so a few thoughts.
Yeah, and I think also sort of I would say based on the statement that I read from the lawmakers proposing the legislation that they almost certainly did not know that already existed. But I think there would be something to be said for raising the profile of that work and saying, listen, at some point we have to choose and say, what is the ultimate standard that federal agencies are going to go by, because the lack of clarity is certainly limiting both the abilities of the agencies to use civil drones, which could be very useful for them in their work, and also the ability of manufacturers, domestic manufacturers and global manufacturers to be able to meet those standards. So clarity is good, adding yet another standard on top of existing standards without choosing which one is going to be the final say is a little problematic. Tim, what do you think?
There's a lot that can go wrong for sure. The drone industry is a software industry, and if NIST is diving into the drone software, then obviously that's a whole nother world. As you mentioned, Mark, before, the IT industry is pretty standard across the board as far as getting cybersecurity standards there. But drone software companies, drone manufacturers, whether they're here or abroad, it's just there's a lot of moving parts in this. So obviously it's a proposal right now, right?
Yep, it's a
They're
proposal.
they're wanting it. So a lot can happen before now and implementation for sure.
Yeah, yet another. There were a few things that I thought were problematic, and it kind of goes back to Mark's point about everybody sort of thinks that drones are brand new and no one's ever thought of this before. Like no one's ever thought of social cybersecurity guidelines. Go back to your 2016 presentation. But and as you say, NIST started it in two years before that, so it's not it's definitely not new. But I think also definitely tying things into GSA schedules and so forth really requires that there's very careful due diligence done on this, because it can have a big impact on the both the users and the drone manufacturers. So important to keep that one on the radar and see what happens. Okay. And our last article was one talking about the sort of evolving role of UAVs in aerial wildland firefighting. And let me just take the opportunity here to say that Mark has just been named a UC Berkeley Fellow in Disaster Response. Is that correct?
The disaster lab, yes.
Disaster Labs, yes. So excellent. So what are your thoughts about this?
I've lost. So one of the big things that we developed the drone program back in 2006 was to tackle some of these issues in wildland fire. We actually started flying fire missions in 2012. Started flying crewed and uncrewed aircraft in the same airspace, not that at different altitudes or different times, but doing that in 2015. And since then, we've developed aerial ignition capability. They've been used to spot spot fires behind the lines and actually direct firefighters back there to put them out. In one instance, saving $50 million in land value and infrastructure. I think it's going to continue to grow in terms of their applicability. Right now, there's a lot of focus on the pre-fire, doing risk mitigation. And one of those ways is prescribed fires. And really, in order to scale that, you need to, right now it's limited to just federal employees, but I truly believe that we can have contractors doing that, like we do for all of our crewed aviation and wildland fire, under the supervision of a federal burn boss. And we can really escalate the amount of prescribed burning, and we can even do prescribed burning at night when conditions are more favorable, less wind, lower temperatures, and higher relative humidities. So we can help mitigate the risk even using drones. And finally, you know, we have gaps in our coverage supporting firefighters in the communities they protect. We can only fly right now crewed aircraft pretty much during day VFR hours, during clear air. And so there's only a handful of aircraft that fly during the night, still very dangerous. And we have huge, lengthy smoky periods during the day, and nothing can fly there except the drones. So, you know, moving drones to where they can actually provide suppression and logistics to the firefighters on the ground when nothing else can get there, and even emergency extraction for injured firefighters. I think there's just tremendous opportunities we haven't fully explored yet.
Yeah, I think the ecosystem is really dramatically strengthened too. I remember hearing a talk at Drone Deploy, which was absolutely fascinating during the sort of Paradise wildfires, and kind of talking about what it took to get the mission accomplished, using little paper plastic baggies to put SD cards in and drive them back to San Francisco to the drone deploy headquarters where they were processing. And definitely the ecosystem is evolving very rapidly to not only sort of provide more data that can be gathered from the drone, but also to deliver it in in sort of better, faster, more broad fashion to the stakeholders. So
And to your point, Miriam, the drones themselves could serve as part of that persistent connectivity node. Persistent connectivity as most folks know, is one of the big shortfalls right now in wildland fire. You know, fires happen where they happen, often remote areas without coverage. And even where they have coverage, sometimes the infrastructure, that telecom infrastructure, is taken out or at least overwhelmed by 911 calls and all the folks you bring in for fighting the fire. So, you know, having the ability to, you know, basically put up a network, you know, using drones, another extraordinary opportunity for this ecosystem.
Miriam, I
absolutely.
thought it was what fascinated me in the article is 85% of wildland fires in the US are started by humans. And it would be interesting to layer that and find out what the causes are, and where that drones could be used to kind of address that. Is it forest fires? Is it arson? Is it irresponsible throwing cigarettes out windows? And can you detect the areas, because humans are not going too deep into the woods to start fires. I would imagine that it's a lot of it is access to roads and close by cities. So yeah, they didn't go into detail as to where that data came from or how they achieved it, but it would be interesting to see how drones could be used on the prevention side based on the data they have on how fires are started. And if you've never seen the Evo Max N camera, that thing will detect light from miles away, where a thermal camera will not detect the fire as it starts, but the Evo, that night vision camera, in the pitch black, will detect that fire. We had it out in Mojave Desert, and we were detecting campfires miles away. You know, and it's really impressive, the technology and the advancements going forward. Like you said, Mark, hot days. You know, if the weather is predictable, then maybe the drone use continues for those particular hot spots, if you will.
Yeah.
I think additionally, an interesting point that the author brought up in this particular article, they happen to be interviewing Cameron Shell of Dragonfly. And they said that he commented that the replicator program, that's the government initiative to rapidly scale production of UAVs, could actually really encourage the development of more products for civil use for firefighting. So that, kind of that tie. I always say that I started out saying I don't write about military applications, and now that's just not relevant because so many of the military use aircraft are so applicable to civil use also. So interesting thought, and certainly something that we hope will happen is that those programs will help scale more innovation in the firefighting realm. So, all right. Moving on, we're right at 3:30. I love keeping to a timetable. Mark, we wanted to ask you to weigh in on a couple of things that I know you have expertise in. I just covered another talk of yours. I think that's going to be my career now, so I'll just follow you around, around and write down what you say. Um, Always a good article, but at the most recent at the National Public Safety Conference, you spoke about working within the confines of the NDAA. Um, and I think that that's really relevant. Other platforms have gone into the rights and wrongs and whether that's a good idea or a bad idea ad nauseum. But at this point, as Charles Warner once said, this is our sandwich and we have to eat it. So we're really talking about the most effective way to keep your drone program up while working within the confines of current regulations. So, could you talk just about sort of the top few things that you think programs should be considering as they look to move forward within the confines of the current regulation?
Yeah, thank you. And like Charles, I'm kind of a glass half full guy and I'm an operator, so I want to know how to get it done. It's the law, right? So American Security Drone Act is what I've been
Right, right. Sorry, I
talking
said
about.
it
No,
wrong.
no, it's tied to
You're
the
good.
NDA, so it's all good. I think first, let me, kind of the winners list, right? So if you're part of DHS, DOD, DOJ, Department of State, Department of Transportation, FAA, National Transportation Safety Board, or NOAA, you have an exemption. And it's a very wide exemption for those agencies. NOAA is, science missions, any of the mission objectives, I mean, it's very broad. So that's great. We were talking about wildland fire. So there's an exception for wildland fire, and it's the full spectrum of wildland fire missions. So it can be preventative measures as well as, actual suppression, and that's a positive change. Also, search and rescue, you have an exemption for that. So that's phenomenal that those agencies can continue their work, and not have to worry about a disruption. Of course, it does not apply to the general public. So if you're out there in the general public, you can buy and fly, in accordance with the FAA regulations as you want. And the same for companies, and as long as they're not working in the federal government, then they're exempt as well. State and territorial, local, if they're doing your own thing, then again, you're not subject to that. If you're working with the federal government and you have an agreement that allows you to do that already, then that will continue. For those agencies that aren't covered by those exemptions, there's several opportunities here. You can apply for a waiver. There's a process within the law that allows you to do that. If you're on the blue list, looking for a blue drone, those exist and those are available. AUVSI has their green UAS program, which is another alternative. And then the law does not prohibit agencies from going out and qualifying other drones. So for that, I would recommend partnering with an agency like the Department of Defense or NASA or someone with that kind of technical capability to determine whether it's from a covered foreign entity or not. And then another one I see a lot is folks looking to drone and data as a service, because we have this compliance issue along with the complexity that kind of increases with the new drones, and then we have all this cost with some of the more expensive drones that are not on the covered list. And so I see a lot of that opportunity. And then there's some other opportunities in the federal side in there, in the service side, where you can actually, what I call drones for better program. There's a new program called the Meta Protege program from Ability One that allows you to partner with a mentor company that may be doing drone work and actually provide meaningful jobs to wounded warriors and other Americans with disabilities. And as we know, drones are a great tool for that constituency, underemployed and underserved constituency. So those are some ways. If you're on the list of exemptions or exceptions, and if you're not, then there's some other ways to continue your operations or even expand your operations.
Great. Thank you. Took me a second to unclick my mute there, but thank you very much. That's helpful. Again, I would encourage you to take a look at the regulation yourself. Certainly refer to drone responders, ask questions and so forth. But there are certainly ways to ensure that you can protect your program and still work within the current regulations. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Berkeley. What's sort of most exciting about that?
So that the Berkeley Disaster Lab is doing a lot of great things, and I got actually connected with them through the work I'm doing in supporting agencies and companies when wildland fire, and they're testing out new materials and new coatings and applications that could be used to prevent fire. They also have a wonderful program called the Fire Foundry Program, and that's the human aspect. They're working with community colleges and underserved communities to give young people an opportunity to learn wildland firefighting and structural firefighting, giving them the training and the opportunity to go into these very meaningful, very necessary careers, very important careers. And as we know from lots of articles, we're being challenged now in finding enough firefighters. And so I think it's a great, fantastic program. Really proud to be part of the disaster lab, and looking forward to continue to work with them, connecting with some of the other things I'm doing in wildland fire.
Excellent. So what else are you doing in wildland fire? I think this is such a big topic because we tend to spend a lot of time on the law enforcement side, which, there is always a lot to say and important uses. But, the last few seasons have been really devastating for specific communities. And I think that's only going to increase. So,
Right. So I had a wonderful 16-year education when I transitioned from retiring from the military into the Department of the Interior. And my office of Aviation Services supported fire. Was a large part of the support we provided to the department. And I have just the greatest respect for firefighters. It's the firefighters on the ground that ultimately put out and contain those wildfires. Aviation is a support to that. And so now, as I'm in this third phase of my third career, I guess I'm serving as what I would call an operational technologist. As an aerospace engineer and as a test pilot, I certainly have the technology background. I was always big into bringing technology out to the fleet and out to the field. But now I help connect industry from startups to large companies with agencies, like DOI, Forest Service. NASA's doing tremendous, and they always have done tremendous work in wildland fire, and just serving as translator and helping them try to move the needle for us. Because you're right, these have become fire years, and what got us here is not going to get us out of this situation. And everyone has been rightly focusing on some of the preventative measures. Last May, the Congressional Research Service put out a report that said we had a 20-year backlog in hazardous fuels treatments. So we need to figure out how to do this because, that's the stuff that's going to get ready. It is getting ready to burn, and it doesn't matter how much focus we put on suppression, it's just going to be too much. So we need to balance the system. And so I've been serving in wherever I'm needed to help with those things.
Great. So at least it does seem like sort of technology is being brought to the problem to address it. So always from a technology standpoint, good thing.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've been able to do is, I was fortunate to be able to implement a number of technologies, and the the program, the path, the system, the secret sauce, if you will, that we use to do that included bringing those firefighters in on the first day, concept development, and keeping them there all the way through, and having them connect with industry, and they gain ownership, and it just becomes a much better product at the end. So yeah, that's critically important.
Sorry, Tim, did you want to step in there, or I didn't want
No,
to
this is
talk
all,
over
no,
you?
this,
Okay.
nope, I'm good.
What do you think needs to happen from the regulatory standpoint to kind of best support those operations?
Uh,
Big question.
no, big question. First, the FAA was instrumental in helping us develop our drone program. We couldn't have gotten there without them. I think, one of the things I've always talked about is, if you think back, our whole airspace structure regulations were developed kind of, started back in the 50s, and they were developed for the technology of the time and the commercial markets of the time. And I think we still have an opportunity to take a look at how that's done today, and the technologies in the markets today, and provide some flexibility. I think UTM, UAM, the whole alphabet soup of all that low altitude federated structure is still being developed. I also think that the crewed aircraft world needs to come into the digital age. If you're flying in Class G airspace, which is about 98% of all the airspace that touches the ground in America, you don't need a radio and you don't need a transponder, right?
Yeah, that makes it
And so now
difficult.
that's difficult if you want to go to this kind of digital infrastructure. There's a constituency out there that's not playing. So I think we need to think about those things, and not be stuck completely as we were in those markets and technologies, because we are with phenomenal new technologies, and we have expanded those markets, amazing new opportunities in the markets now.
I think all of us have seen a lot of progress. It's easy to sort of get fixated on what hasn't happened, but we have seen a lot of progress in regulation since the three of us, four of us, certainly started in this area. And I think also that new leadership at the FAA has even sort of sped that up further, which is really encouraging. So I think that's great. What do you think? I'm very curious about this because I see it sort of overseas, and I'm not quite clear on how much is still very much a test case. What do you think of the potential for eVTOLs, larger uncrewed vehicles, possibly passenger eVTOLs, for the use of firefighting?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been involved with a lot of AAM as well in this phase of my life. And yeah, I absolutely see the future use of eVTOL aircraft on wildfires. They bring so many attributes to that space, to that mission space, that it's a natural occurrence. You think about it, fixed wing aircraft and helicopters didn't start out flying on wildfires, but they're certainly good at it. So, I see the same thing happening with eVTOL. So I'm really excited about that.
So do you see them as sort of an uncrewed substitution for manned aircraft or an auxiliary thing? Do they do something different or do they simply not put a pilot in harm's way?
Well, some of them are right now are starting out with a pilot in them. So I think, those certainly were, 10 years ago, we tested, successfully tested, a crewed helicopter, FAA certificated helicopter that could be flown with the pilot in the cockpit or with the pilot, down,
That
sitting.
is amazing to me that that was 10 years
It was
ago.
10 years ago.
It's
Did
amazing.
water dropping on firefight, on fires. We did autonomous dipping, did logistics deliveries to specific GPS locations, did simulated rescue of firefighters. So the technology, again, it exists. And, the wonderful thing about that aircraft and those type of aircraft, and eVTOL would fall into this, is already certificated by the FAA, already have safety features to keep humans like us safe, right? So they're even more safe than perhaps something smaller that's built just, to fly and doesn't care about, anybody inside, because there is nobody inside. And because they're larger, they're easier to see, and they can carry electronics that allow them to be electronically identified and carry more lights and things. So I absolutely see, you're asking, pilot or unpilot, both. I see them, and they are the way we can really close those 16-hour gaps we have at night and in the smoky periods during the day, which can last multiple consecutive days. And that fire is continuing to grow and firefighters on the ground not being supported. So yeah, very exciting times. Like I said, I briefed at the Aerial Firefighting Conference, Sacramento. This is the second golden age of flight. And we're really converging here with technology in our application of it, our use cases, and how we're thinking about all this, not just the technology, but public acceptance. Just very exciting times.
The second golden age of flight. I love that. That's
Oh.
so what else are you working on? I know you are all over the place, but what are some of the more exciting interesting things that are sort of capturing your attention these days?
Yeah, so I mentioned briefly the drones for better, kind of take off my drones for good. So I'm working with a nonprofit who traditionally services the federal government in terms of employment for Americans with disabilities, wounded warriors, and that employment has traditionally been in kind of a base operating support function, food service and janitorial, those types of things. And this new mentor protege program that only started last March, so a year old now, really provides an opportunity for, like I said, a technology company like a drone company to partner with this nonprofit to provide new job opportunities in this technical field, whether it's operating a drone, building a drone, doing data work, so many opportunities. And so I'm working with the nonprofit and exploring those. In the federal government looks very, very highly on that kind of thing. They provide contracts that are sole source. They can't be protested through the GAO, and they, as long as the requirement exists, the contract never ends. And so it's both good for the government because it's easy to get that contract, obviously great for the vendors because now they have that contract, and it's going to be fantastic for the community. We have so many wounded warriors out there. I read there's 30% of veterans between 21 and 64 have some sort of service connected or otherwise disability, and their unemployment rate is much higher than the national average. So as a veteran and with a disability myself, I'm very excited to be part of that effort.
That's amazing work that you're doing. And I would also comment that one of the things that I've always sort of appreciated very much about the drone industry and try to highlight is that in a way drones are very, very accessible. So to be a pilot of a manned aircraft, you are required to meet certain physical guidelines or standards, and those are not applicable. You can be very, very excellent as a drone operator and a drone pilot. You can really develop your your niche skills to a very high degree without some of those physical I don't know what you call them, but without the same guidelines that you need to be a manned pilot. So
drone is a first responder, right? How many law enforcement officers and firefighters are injured on the job and unable to perform the duties that they really want to. And there's another opportunity for them to perform, and stay in the line of work that has meant so much to them. So
absolutely.
it's not
And not
those,
just stay in it, but stay in it in an extremely important and meaningful
yes,
way
yeah,
driving forward.
absolutely. It's exciting times.
And Tim, in your role as the training, UAV training director at the regional training center, you must see that the abilities can be much, much wider for drone operators. So
Yeah, a lot of what we do and how we train comes from people out there doing it every day and the ideas that they have, the creative uses of drones, and it's pretty amazing how the minds work and how things have developed. Going from quadcopters to tethered to fixed wing VTOLs. I think the future is definitely that. I think the future is less quad and more VTOL operations. Aerodome they're using radar now, and that radar is about 100 pounds, and it's about the size of a I don't know, it's a very small box. So I see that becoming more and more prevalent in the drone industry, especially in wildland fire operations, where you can put a radar up there and really make use of your assets in the air. So yeah, it's definitely the training evolves as everything else evolves. So it's pretty exciting to sit in a class and have someone come up with a idea that's never been done before, and it's like, okay, well, that's a great idea. Let's go out and try it. Let's see if it works. And a lot of times it does work.
first, let's call the FAA.
Well, yeah, obviously. And for our participants, I encourage, if anybody has questions, just type it in the chat or Q&A area, and we'll make sure we get it. I do have one question for you, Mark, and going back just real briefly to ASDA, and a lot can happen by the end of December in 2025 as far as manufacturers and aircraft goes. Is there, does it define, because I was trying to find it and I really couldn't, does it define the vetting process for an aircraft? Do you have to go through the blue or the green process in order to be used by the government? How is that defined in that law?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. So the American Security Drone Act, really everything is centered around a covered foreign entity. So if the drone or the associated elements, which that list is yet to be identified fully, but if it's manufactured by a covered foreign entity, assembled by a covered foreign entity, or a subsidiary or an affiliate of a covered foreign entity. So basically, that's there's no other criteria other than that. And so the blue, we know, those are not covered by, those do not fall under that. They've been already vetted. So that's just one way. There are other ways. Like I said, if you're an agency, you could ostensibly go out there and have that vetted. If you want this particular drone, and work with the manufacturer and perhaps an independent agency. We used DHS CISA when I was there, and the Idaho National Laboratory to do some security testing and teardowns on drones that we wanted to use. And so there are other ways to do that. But that's a great question. Thank you for asking that.
So the blue, I think the blues, I don't think there's going to be any more blue added. Maybe there might be, but so a manufacturer could get their own drone certified through another process. Is that right?
No, well, that's the challenge. This is the catch-22, is that the manufacturers really don't have that opportunity other than through the green program. They can go out to AUVSI through their program, pay to have their drones certified in the green. So that's the one avenue direct for manufacturers. agencies could, if they're not already on the exemption, they could go out and they could self-qualify a drone, make sure it's not manufactured, assembled by a covered foreign entity.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah, because I
Great.
do think that it's important to note that there are a lot of drones that meet the guidelines stated in the NSTA that are not blue SUAS. And, no knock on the DIU. They're certainly working up to capacity on that. But there are a lot of drones that are not necessarily directly appropriate for Department of Innovation defense innovation units purposes. So they may not be first on the list for evaluation. And they are still NDAA compliant, which was the earlier regulation that laid out that there's the Teledyne FLIR Cirrus drone, which is manufactured in Taiwan, not a covered entity, absolutely appropriate within the confines of the guidelines, as well as other U.S. manufacturers, Skydio, teal drones, and so forth. But there is a wider variety of drones that do meet those guidelines than are strictly defined by the blue SUAS list. And I just want to say that because I think commonly people sort of think that's the easiest. The easiest way, certainly the GSA took that approach and said, "Oh, that's just the easiest way to go. If you have to be on the blue SUAS list to be on the schedule." But there are other drones that definitely meet those guidelines.
Absolutely. And as we know, the blue program is designed to meet DoD requirements, and many of those requirements don't fit what some of the civilian agencies need. So yeah, absolutely. And there's a ton of drones out there that meet the criteria or don't meet the covered foreign entity criteria under that law that can be used. So all good.
So we have a question that's above my pay grade. Maybe
I
you
looked
can.
at that and I'm so sorry about
Yeah.
mine too, because I have not heard of that.
Question is, do we see the MQ-25 Stingray coming into reality? I guess it's whose reality, right? It's already it's a I think it's a naval test operation, right, off carriers is
Yep.
the Stingray for refueling surveillance. That's all I know about it, but I'm just wondering if it coming into more of a domestic market.
Yeah, I don't know that coming into a domestic market. I've mentioned this in some briefings when talking about wildland fire. The Department of the Interior, I should say, the Department of the Interior's total budget wasn't enough to buy one of the aircraft carriers they used to land on. U.S. Forest Service and Department of the Interior together is probably about 6-7% of the DoD budget. So understand those things are great tools. I love the tools I got to fly, but probably beyond the ability of some of those other agencies, because there's a lot of infrastructure that goes along with those tools as well. It's not just the aircraft.
Yeah.
Yep. So exciting times. I definitely, as we wrap up here, I know that for myself, the theme of the week, unfortunately, as the geopolitical conflict in the world sort of continues, but what we are seeing is the importance of these small drone platforms, and I do think that they are now transitioning. There is a lot of overlap between civil uses and government uses, and the technology continues to evolve very rapidly. So
To Tim's point, I actually think this influence is going more from the commercial side to the military side. In 2010, I met with the DoD because we were using kind of excess DoD drones to do test evaluation. And I said, we were going to go commercial for a lot of reasons. And I said, you guys should think about these in your activities. And in 2010, they said, no, these are just toys. They'll never really come to anything. And so here we are. So I think the influence is going to go that way, as opposed to from DoD back to the commercial and domestic side.
absolutely. I think that's an excellent point. All right. Well, we are wrapping up for this afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Thank you so much, Mark Bathrick, for being with us. Really appreciate your time. It's an honor to have you on the show.
My pleasure.
Tim, as always, a pleasure. Hope to see you on the road sometime. And you also, Charles. Hope to see you soon. Anything you want to leave us with, Charles? No. Okay. Again, though, I do think that anybody who has any questions about anything that we discussed, please do take a look at Drone Responders. They are a great resource. They have papers and conversations going on about most of the issues under discussion. So, as
Thank you,
always,
Mark.
and
Appreciate your time.
Yeah, likewise, Tim.
we'll see you next month. Thank you very much.
Bye.